Okay guys, so in this video we are going to talk about centering and laying out elements basically. So let's get into it. So you see this little flow of elements that I have here with an image, a piece of text basically. And what I want to achieve is this exact effect here. I want this image to be perfectly aligned and centered aligned with these elements, and I also want them to be spread out. Because if we look at the markup here, we see that we have a list element of some sort, and there's a div around all these elements, and then there's the image, there's a paragraph, another paragraph, and a third paragraph, and I want them to just be laid out in this nice fashion. So how do we achieve this? Well, let's have a look at the markup just really quickly. So we see that we have this HTML page here, a UL, a list element, a div, which wraps the image, 3 paragraphs, and then we have basically copy pasted these 3 elements 3 times. And we're also including the center.css. Now I'm just going to very briefly scroll you through all of this. It's not that much. And that's basically it. Let's actually take a closer look here. What's actually going on? I find it more easier just to show you here in the browser as opposed to into the file. So the first and foremost thing that's happening is that we have this div here, which is called the notice header. And what's the magic that happens is this property here, flex. So flexbox is basically the most. If you don't know flexbox, you should really learn flexbox. It's probably one of the most important CSS properties there is in modern development, modern time. So basically, what happens now is that I'm saying that, hey, flexbox, put this on a row. And by default, what flexbox is going to do is that it's going to do something like this. And what's happening now is that when I set something to flex, the elements that are inside of my container or my div here are going to be spread out on a row. As you can see here, the elements are perfectly aligned. But what's the issue with the image? Well, let's just look at the image. So what I've said, in order to achieve this rounding effect, I've set the width to 44 pixels because I don't want the image to be wider than that. And the image itself, as you can see here, is 44 times 100 pixels. If I just remove that, we can actually see that the natural size of the image is actually 100 times 100 pixels, but I don't really want that. So that's why I set it to 44 pixels. But why is it being stretched out like this? Well, because the default behavior of Flexbox is to stretch the elements across its height. So you can see that the image is the height of the window basically, or rather of the container, and then the same thing is true for these paragraphs here. Even though there's not that much text, it stretches the whole height of my little notice header here. So what I can do is that I can say align item center. And what that means is that instead of having the default behavior of stretching all the elements from top to bottom, I say, hey, regardless of the element's height, can you just put all these things in the center of my element? I just want them to align in the center, and then these calculations are done for you. Now, you may not think that this is a big thing, but it's actually a very big deal because back in the day, you couldn't actually do this in a nice way. So if you had an image that was higher than the other elements, or in this case text, you had to do this manually. You'd had to know how high the image was and how to align it with paddings and margins and all that stuff. But Flexbox does this for you. And then finally, I want these elements to just flow across and be spread out in this nice fashion we saw earlier. And that's where justify comes in. So justify content is just saying that I set justify content to space between, which means that Flexbox is going to take all the elements, and based on the total real estate or the area within the content or the container, it's going to evenly spread out each element and put an even amount of space based on the element's dimension between each element. Now this is very powerful as well, because if I didn't have something like Flexbox, if I didn't have it, I would have to calculate this on a case-by-case basis. It would be absolutely horrible, because notice that my name Frederick is much longer than Lars and Christensen, It's also long. They have different dimensions, and the image has its own dimension. So calculating that manually would have been a real hassle if I wanted it to be this even spread. So Flexbox helps quite a bit. I hope that this has been useful to you. Have a great day.